It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday in Seattle, nothing more than a favor between family members. But from the moment Daniel Harper agreed to help his mother-in-law, Linda Brooks, shop for a new car, something subtle began to shift in ways he could not explain. His wife, Emily, had been called into an extra shift at the hospital, and she had kissed his cheek before leaving, thanking him for taking her place, saying with a warm smile that her mom trusted him more than any salesman, and Daniel had laughed, promising it would just be a quick trip to the dealership and back, simple and practical. Yet as he drove toward the large auto plaza just outside the city, he felt a strange anticipation that had nothing to do with horsepower or price negotiations. Linda was already there when he arrived, standing beside her aging silver sedan, the wind lightly moving her shoulder-length hair, dressed casually but elegantly in jeans, a soft sweater, and boots that gave her quiet confidence. And Daniel noticed something different about her, not in a dramatic way, but in a way that made him look twice, as if he were seeing her not just as Emily's mother, but as a woman with her own presence and story. She greeted him warmly, thanking him again for coming, and when their hands met in a polite handshake, he felt the brief warmth linger longer than expected, a small spark that caught him off guard and made him quickly pull back to refocus on the practical reason they were there. They walked through rows of shiny SUVs and crossovers, discussing fuel efficiency, safety ratings, and budget limits. But their conversation soon drifted beyond technical details into personal territory, with Linda admitting how strange it felt to make big decisions alone after her husband had passed away 5 years earlier, her voice steady but carrying quiet loneliness. And Daniel found himself listening closely, offering reassurance, sharing how he sometimes felt overwhelmed by responsibility too, how adulthood had become more about stability than excitement, and how he missed the feeling of spontaneity he once had. Inside the dealership, under bright showroom lights, they sat side by side while a friendly salesman explained financing options, and as they leaned in to look at paperwork, their shoulders brushed, a simple accidental touch that made Daniel suddenly aware of her perfume, light and floral, and he shifted slightly, telling himself he was overthinking, yet the awareness remained. During the test drive of a dark blue SUV, Linda asked him what he truly wanted out of life, a question so direct it made him pause mid-sentence, and he laughed nervously, admitting he hadn't thought deeply about it in a long time, that between work deadlines and household bills, dreams had quietly been placed on hold, and she looked at him with genuine interest, not judgment, not criticism, just curiosity. And that look made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt for a while. After deciding on the SUV, Linda suggested they grab coffee across the street before finalizing paperwork, saying she wanted to think clearly before signing anything. And in the quiet corner of a small cafe, away from the noise of sales pitches, their conversation deepened even more, moving from cars to marriage, from routine to regret, from responsibilities to forgotten ambitions. And Daniel spoke more openly than he intended, confessing that sometimes he felt invisible in his own life, loved but not deeply understood. And Linda listened with an attentiveness that felt rare, her eyes steady, her tone gentle, telling him that everyone deserves to feel valued beyond their roles, beyond being a provider or a caretaker. The moment felt suspended in time, neither inappropriate nor planned, just emotionally charged in a way that was new and slightly unsettling. And when their fingers brushed while reaching for the sugar jar, the contact lingered half a second too long, neither of them immediately pulling away, both aware that something had quietly shifted. Driving back to the dealership, the silence between them felt heavy but not uncomfortable, filled with unspoken thoughts. And Daniel found himself glancing at her profile as she looked out the window, wondering when he had started noticing details like the softness in her expression or the strength in her posture. Once the paperwork was signed and Linda officially owned her new SUV, she thanked him sincerely, her voice carrying warmth that felt deeper than gratitude for help with a purchase. And when she hugged him goodbye in the parking lot, it was a normal family embrace. Yet Daniel felt the contact resonate longer than it should have, a warmth that stayed with him even after he stepped back. As he drove home, he replayed the day in his mind, telling himself it had simply been meaningful conversation. Two adults sharing honest thoughts, nothing more. Yet he couldn't ignore the subtle shift inside him, the realization that he had connected with Linda on an emotional level that surprised him, that her questions had stirred parts of him long dormant, and that the afternoon had awakened a sense of excitement he hadn't expected to find while shopping for a car. That night, as he sat beside Emily on the couch, watching television in comfortable silence, he felt both grateful for his stable marriage and quietly restless, aware that something had changed, not in action, but in feeling. And across town, Linda sat in her living room looking at the keys to her new SUV resting on the table, smiling softly, yet thoughtfully, knowing that the day had given her more than a vehicle. It had given her a reminder that she was still capable of deep connection, still able to make someone feel understood. And as both of them lay awake later that night, staring at their ceilings in separate homes, neither could fully name what had begun. Only that a simple car shopping trip had opened a door to emotions neither had planned, and that sometimes the most unexpected journeys begin not on the road, but in the quiet space between two people who suddenly see each other differently. The days after the car shopping trip refused to return to normal, and Daniel felt it from the moment Monday morning arrived, because while he sat at his office desk in downtown Seattle, staring at spreadsheets and emails, his mind kept drifting back to the cafe, to Linda's steady gaze, to the way she had asked him what he truly wanted from life, and he tried to dismiss it as overthinking, telling himself it had simply been a deep conversation. Nothing more. Yet the memory carried a quiet warmth that lingered in his chest. At home that evening, Emily talked about a difficult patient case at the hospital, and Daniel listened, nodding, offering support. But he noticed how routine their exchange felt, how predictable the rhythm of their marriage had become. Not unhappy, not broken, just steady and structured. And for the first time he compared it to the spark of unexpected connection he had felt with Linda, which made him immediately uncomfortable with himself. Meanwhile, across town, Linda was adjusting to her new SUV, sitting in the driver's seat in her driveway longer than necessary, running her fingers over the steering wheel, thinking less about the car and more about the conversation she had shared with her son-in-law, replaying his words about feeling stuck, about wanting more than routine. And she felt both sympathy and something deeper, a renewed sense of purpose in being able to listen, to matter to someone again, to feel that her presence made a difference. 3 days later, she sent him a simple text asking if he had time to help her figure out the advanced dashboard settings, and Daniel stared at the message longer than he should have before replying that he could stop by after work, fully aware that the SUV did not truly require his help. When he arrived at her house, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street, and he felt a small surge of nervous energy as he walked up the driveway, reminding himself that he was just helping family, nothing more. Yet the awareness of their last conversation hovered between them the moment she opened the door, greeting him with a soft smile that felt warmer than usual. They sat inside the parked SUV again, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and Daniel leaned forward to demonstrate the touchscreen controls, explaining Bluetooth pairing and navigation features, but the air inside the vehicle felt charged, and when their arms brushed lightly, neither pulled away immediately, both pretending to focus on the screen while fully aware of the subtle electricity in that shared space. Linda broke the silence first, thanking him not just for the help, but for listening the other day, saying she hadn't realized how much she missed meaningful conversations, and Daniel admitted quietly that he hadn't either, and the honesty in that exchange deepened the emotional thread that had begun days earlier. They ended up moving inside her house for coffee, sitting at the kitchen table where family dinners had once felt simple and uncomplicated. And now the setting felt different, more intimate. Though nothing inappropriate happened, just two adults speaking openly about life, loneliness, responsibility, and dreams that had faded under the weight of time. Linda shared how losing her husband had left her feeling invisible at times, as if the world no longer saw her beyond being a widow or a mother. And Daniel listened with empathy, realizing he had never considered how deeply she might still carry that silence, and he told her about the pressure he felt to always appear stable and strong, about how he sometimes wished someone would ask him what he needed instead of what he could provide. Their words flowed easily, without effort, and the connection grew not through grand gestures, but through vulnerability, through small admissions that created understanding. And when Daniel finally stood to leave, there was a pause at the door, a moment of hesitation that neither could fully explain, before Linda thanked him again with a gentle hug that lingered half a second longer than it should have. That night, Daniel lay beside Emily in bed, staring at the ceiling, aware that while he had done nothing physically wrong, emotionally he was standing closer to a boundary than he ever had before, and the realization both unsettled and excited him, because the connection with Linda felt real, built on shared honesty rather than impulse, yet he knew that emotional closeness can sometimes carry weight equal to actions. Over the next week, their communication continued in small, careful ways. Short texts about work, comments about the new car's performance, occasional jokes that only they seemed to understand. And each exchange strengthened the quiet bond forming between them, while Daniel found himself noticing the growing distance in his conversations with Emily, not because he loved her less, but because he now craved the depth and attentiveness he had found elsewhere. At a Sunday family dinner, the three of them sat around the table, and Daniel caught Linda's eye across the room, the glance brief but filled with unspoken awareness, and he quickly looked away, guilt rising in his chest, because Emily sat between them, smiling, unaware of the emotional current flowing silently beneath ordinary conversation. Later that evening, as Daniel washed dishes beside his wife, he realized that what had started as a simple car shopping favor had evolved into something far more complicated, a connection built not on physical desire, but on emotional recognition. And he understood that while no visible line had been crossed, the invisible ones were beginning to blur, leaving him standing in a place that felt both comforting and dangerous at the same time, aware that if he did not step back soon, the feelings growing quietly between him and Linda could reshape everything he believed was stable in his life. The emotional distance between right and wrong began to feel dangerously thin, and Daniel sensed it every time his phone buzzed with a message from Linda, because even when the words were simple, asking about his day or sharing a small story about the new SUV, the meaning underneath felt deeper, more personal, and he started to realize that what they were building was not harmless anymore, even though nothing physical had happened. At work, he found himself checking his phone too often, rereading their conversations, remembering the softness in her voice, the way she made him feel understood without effort, and that awareness created both warmth and guilt in equal measure, because he knew emotional closeness carries its own weight. Linda felt it too, sitting alone in her quiet house in Bellevue, staring at her phone after sending a message and wondering when companionship had started to feel this complicated, because she loved her daughter deeply and respected Daniel. Yet she could not deny the comfort she felt when he opened up to her, the sense of being needed, valued, alive again after years of loneliness. One evening, Daniel stopped by her house again, telling himself it was just to return a tool he had borrowed, but both of them knew the visit carried more than that, and when she opened the door there was a pause, a silent recognition that they were stepping further into something fragile. They sat in her living room, the late sunset casting warm light through the windows, and the conversation quickly moved beyond small talk into feelings neither had fully named, Daniel admitting that he looked forward to her messages more than he should, and Linda confessing that their talks had brought back emotions she thought were gone forever, not reckless desire, but the simple joy of connection. The honesty hung in the air, heavy but sincere, and Daniel felt his heartbeat quicken, not from physical attraction, but from emotional exposure, because acknowledging it made it real. He thought about Emily at home, unaware of this growing bond, trusting him completely, and that image forced him to confront a truth he had been avoiding, that even without touching beyond innocent gestures, he had allowed his heart to drift into territory that did not belong to him. Linda sensed his hesitation and spoke softly, saying that what they felt was human, but that they had to be careful, that loneliness and routine can blur judgment, and her words carried both wisdom and sadness, because she understood that continuing down this path could damage the very family she cherished. Daniel stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the quiet street, realizing that the excitement he had felt was now mixed with fear, not of scandal, but of loss, because if he kept going, he risked losing his wife's trust, his sense of integrity, and the stability he had worked so hard to build. When he turned back toward Linda, he saw not temptation, but vulnerability. A woman who had opened her heart carefully after years of silence, and he respected her too much to let the situation become something harmful. They spoke honestly for the first time about boundaries, about how emotional infidelity can begin quietly through shared secrets and private understanding. And Daniel admitted that he had started comparing his conversations with her to the routine at home, which was unfair to Emily and unfair to himself, because relationships require effort, not escape. Linda nodded, tears forming in her eyes but not falling. And she said that sometimes unexpected connections are meant to remind us of what we're missing in our own lives, not to replace it. And that statement settled deeply inside Daniel because he realized she was right, that what he craved was not her specifically, but the feeling of being heard, appreciated, and alive. The room grew quiet as both understood the choice in front of them, not dramatic or explosive, but serious and life-changing nonetheless. And Daniel finally said the words that had been building in his chest, that they needed to step back, to protect the family bond, to honor the love he still had for Emily and the respect Linda deserved as her mother. The moment felt heavy, but also relieving, because truth, even painful truth, brings clarity, and Linda agreed without resistance, saying she never wanted to be the reason for distance. Between her daughter and husband, they stood facing each other in silence, aware that this conversation marked the end of something that had barely begun, yet had grown emotionally powerful in such a short time. And when Daniel reached for her hand, it was not with longing, but with gratitude, a brief squeeze that said, "Thank you for understanding," and "goodbye" at the same time. As he drove home that night, he felt a mixture of sadness and resolve, replaying every moment since the dealership, understanding now how quickly emotional intimacy can form when two people feel unseen in their own lives. And he promised himself that instead of seeking that feeling elsewhere, he would rebuild it where it belonged. Linda watched his car disappear down the street and closed her door gently, feeling both heartache and peace, because she knew choosing restraint was an act of love too. That evening, Daniel sat beside Emily on the couch and truly listened as she spoke about her day, not distracted, not comparing, but present. And he realized that connection is not something that simply appears. It is something that must be nurtured intentionally. And though part of him would always remember the spark that began during a simple car shopping trip, he now understood that the strongest romance is the one protected by honesty, even when it requires walking away from what feels unexpectedly beautiful. After the difficult conversation in Linda's living room, life did not magically return to normal. But something inside Daniel shifted with clarity he had not felt in weeks, because once he admitted the emotional line had been crossed in his heart, even if not in action, he understood that the only way forward was honesty, not dramatic confession that would wound everyone, but honest change in how he showed up in his own marriage. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with Emily long after dinner, the house quiet, the city lights outside their Seattle apartment glowing softly, and instead of hiding behind small talk, he told her he had been feeling distant, restless, unsure of himself lately, careful not to blame her, careful not to expose Linda, but fully transparent about his own emotional drift. And Emily listened with tired but caring eyes, admitting she had sensed something was off, that their conversations had felt shorter, their laughter less frequent, and hearing that truth broke something open inside him, because he realized how easily silence can grow when no one chooses to speak first. They talked for hours about work pressure, missed date nights, postponed dreams, and how both of them had slipped into survival mode instead of connection. And for the first time in months, Daniel felt present, not distracted by hidden messages or secret glances, but fully aware of the woman he had chosen to build a life with. Meanwhile, Linda kept her distance intentionally. No more casual texts, no more excuses about car settings, because she understood that protecting her daughters' marriage mattered more than feeding her own loneliness. And instead of dwelling on what almost happened, she redirected her energy toward herself, joining a local book club in Bellevue, signing up for a weekend photography class, reconnecting with old friends she had slowly drifted away from after her husband passed. And through those small steps, she began rebuilding a sense of identity that did not depend on emotional validation from someone else. Weeks passed, and the silence between Daniel and Linda, though deliberate, was respectful rather than cold. And when they eventually saw each other again at a family Sunday dinner, the atmosphere felt steady, not tense, because both had chosen restraint over impulse, and when their eyes briefly met across the table, there was no hidden spark, only quiet acknowledgement of a lesson learned. Daniel focused on repairing and strengthening his marriage, planning small surprises for Emily, suggesting weekend hikes, cooking dinner together, even revisiting conversations about dreams they had once shared, and slowly the warmth returned, not as dramatic passion, but as renewed intimacy built on effort and choice. He realized that what had drawn him toward Linda was not romance alone, but the feeling of being heard deeply, and instead of searching for that elsewhere, he began creating it intentionally at home, asking Emily about her fears, her ambitions, her frustrations, truly listening instead of waiting for his turn to speak, and in doing so, he rediscovered why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. Linda, on her side, found empowerment in independence, taking road trips in her new SUV along the Washington coast, embracing the freedom she once feared, and understanding that the connection with Daniel had awakened something important. Not forbidden desire, but awareness that she was still capable of deep feeling, still alive, still worthy of companionship someday in a healthy way. Months later, during Thanksgiving dinner at Linda's house, the family gathered around the table filled with laughter, roasted turkey, and familiar warmth, and Daniel felt genuine gratitude rather than tension, because the storm that had quietly threatened their peace had passed without destruction, thanks to difficult but responsible choices. When Linda handed him a plate and their fingers briefly touched, it carried no secret meaning, only familial affection and mutual respect. And in that simple gesture, he recognized growth, not loss. The experience had changed him, not by scandal, but by awakening him to how easily emotional infidelity can begin in ordinary moments, in shared vulnerability, in conversations that feel harmless at first, and how vital it is to guard the heart with intention. Later that evening, as he and Emily drove home through cool autumn air, she reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. And he squeezed back with certainty, knowing that loyalty is not only about avoiding physical betrayal, but about protecting emotional space too. Linda stood at her front door watching them leave, feeling peaceful rather than lonely, because she had chosen dignity over desire, wisdom over impulse, and she understood now that unexpected romance sometimes enters life not to be pursued, but to teach, to remind, to awaken parts of the heart that need attention. What started during a simple car shopping trip could have unraveled a family, yet instead it became a turning point, a quiet lesson about boundaries, honesty, and the courage to step back before crossing a line that cannot be uncrossed. And in the end, the true romance was not the spark that almost grew in secret, but the commitment to protect love where it rightfully belonged, proving that sometimes the most powerful love story is the one where temptation is faced, understood, and gently released for the sake of something stronger.